The sound of hoofbeats pounded across the dusty plains of Wyoming Territory as Reid raced his stallion toward the horizon, his heart as wild as the frontier stretching before him. It was 1868, 3 years since the war had ended, and 5 years since he'd last seen Sarah Blackwood, the woman who had stolen his heart at 17 and vanished like morning mist when her family moved west without warning. The wind whipped through Jackson's sun-bleached hair as he urged his horse faster, the memory of her hazel eyes haunting him even now at 25. He never expected to hear her name again, certainly not from the lips of a dying man who'd whispered about a widow named Sarah running the Clearwater Ranch just beyond Thunder Creek. Jackson slowed his horse as he approached the small frontier town, its wooden buildings stark against the brilliant blue sky. 5 years of working cattle drives and drifting from town to town had hardened him into a man barely recognizable from the boy who had once written poetry for a girl with copper hair. The town of Thunder Creek was little more than a main street lined with essential businesses: a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and a sheriff's office. Jackson dismounted in front of the hotel, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the hard-packed dirt. He was trail-worn and exhausted, having ridden 3 days straight after hearing the news. "Room for the night," he told the clerk, sliding across a few coins. "And information if you've got it." The balding man behind the desk eyed him suspiciously. "Information costs extra around here, mister." Jackson placed another coin on the counter. "Clearwater Ranch. How far?" "5 miles north," the clerk replied, pocketing the money. "But if you're looking for work, you'd be wasting your time. The widow Blackwood ain't hiring. Banking's trying to foreclose on her place come autumn." Jackson felt his heart constrict. "Widow, you say? Going on 2 years now. Indians got her husband while he was out checking the herd. Left her alone with the ranch and her little girl." The clerk shook his head. "Shame, really. Pretty woman like that." Jackson took the key offered to him, his mind racing. The girl. How old? 4, maybe 5. Cute little thing with red hair, just like her mama. Jackson climbed the stairs to his room, his legs feeling suddenly leaden. 5 years ago, Sarah had disappeared without explanation, her father simply packing up their homestead overnight. Now she was here, widowed with a child that, by his calculations, could have been conceived right around the time she'd vanished from his life. He stood at the small window of his rented room, watching as the sun began its descent over the mountains. Tomorrow, he would ride to Clearwater Ranch and face the woman who had broken his heart and possibly meet a child who shared his blood. Morning came with the distant cry of a rooster. Jackson had barely slept, his mind consumed with memories of Sarah. The touch of her hand, the sound of her laughter, the promises they'd whispered beneath a harvest moon. They had been so young, so certain the world would bend to accommodate their love. After a quick breakfast, Jackson mounted his horse and headed north, following the clerk's directions. The land opened up into rolling grasslands where cattle grazed lazily under the summer sun. In the distance, he could make out a small homestead, a modest cabin with a barn and corral. Smoke rose from the chimney, curling into the cloudless sky. As he approached, Jackson saw a woman hanging laundry on a line. Even from this distance, he recognized the graceful way she moved, the glint of copper in her hair. His heart slammed against his ribs, and he slowed his horse, suddenly uncertain. Sarah paused in her work, shading her eyes to look in his direction. For a moment, she stood perfectly still. Then the sheet she was holding fell from her fingers to the dirt below. Jackson dismounted and removed his hat, holding it before him like a shield. 5 years had changed her. Her face was thinner, her eyes held shadows that hadn't been there before, but she was still undeniably the girl who had haunted his dreams. "Jackson." Her voice was barely audible, carried to him on the gentle breeze. "Hello, Sarah." He took a step forward, then stopped, unsure of his welcome. She looked as though she might faint, her hand going to her throat. "What are you doing here? I heard about your husband. I'm sorry for your loss." The words felt hollow in his mouth. Sarah's eyes darted toward the house, then back to him. "It's been a long time. 5 years, 3 months, and 17 days, he said, the precision of his count revealing more than he intended. A small voice called from the porch of the cabin. "Mama?" Jackson's eyes moved past Sarah to the child standing in the doorway. His breath caught in his throat. The little girl had Sarah's copper hair, but her eyes, those were unmistakably his mother's eyes, a deep blue that ran in the Reid family for generations. "Is that," he began, but Sarah cut him off. "Jessica, go back inside, please. I'll be there in a moment." Her voice was steady, but Jackson could see the tremble in her hands. The little girl hesitated, her curious gaze fixed on the stranger, before reluctantly obeying her mother. When the door closed, Sarah took a deep breath. "You shouldn't have come here, Jackson. Is she mine?" The question hung between them, as tangible as the dust motes dancing in the sunlight. Sarah's silence was answer enough. Jackson felt the ground shift beneath his feet, the world realigning itself around this new truth. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Why did you leave?" Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. "My father found out about us, about the baby. He gave me no choice. He said he'd have you arrested, or worse. You know what he was capable of." Jackson did know. Sarah's father had been a harsh man with powerful connections, even back in Missouri. A man who saw Jackson, the orphan son of a farmer, as nothing but dirt beneath his boots. "So he dragged you out here, and what? Married you off to another man?" Sarah flinched at his tone. Daniel was a good man. He knew about Jessica, knew she wasn't his by blood, but he loved her anyway. He protected us when no one else would. Jackson felt a surge of jealousy toward the dead man who had claimed his family as his own. "And now I'm trying to keep this ranch afloat and give my daughter a good life." Sarah squared her shoulders. "Whatever we had, Jackson, it's in the past. We were children. I never stopped looking for you," he said quietly. "Never stopped loving you." Her composure cracked slightly.
"Please don't say that."
"It's the truth. And now that I've found out I have a daughter, I'm not going anywhere." Sarah's eyes flashed with a mixture of fear and something else, something that looked almost like hope. "You can't just walk into our lives after all this time and expect—" "I don't expect anything," Jackson interrupted. "But I'm not leaving her again. Or you. Not unless you look me in the eye and tell me there's nothing left between us." Sarah looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "The bank is foreclosing on the ranch in 3 months. We'll have to leave Thunder Creek regardless." Jackson felt a surge of determination. "Then I'll help you save it." "Why would you do that?" "Because that's what family does." Jackson took a step closer. "Let me stay, Sarah. Let me work the ranch. If you still want me gone when the debt is paid, I'll go. But at least give me a chance to know my daughter." Sarah studied him, seeing the boy she'd loved in the man who stood before her. After a long moment, she nodded. "You can stay in the bunkhouse. But Jessica doesn't know about you, about who you really are. And I'm not ready for her to know yet." "I understand," Jackson said, though the thought of being near his daughter without being able to claim her tore at his heart.
"Nana."
Jessica's voice called again, more insistent this time. "Coming, sweetheart," Sarah replied, her eyes still on Jackson. "We'll talk more later." She turned and walked toward the house, picking up the fallen sheet as she went. Jackson watched her go, the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future pressing down on him. He'd found them, against all odds. Now he had to find a way to win back the family he never knew he had. The bunkhouse was small and sparse, a single room with 4 bunks, though Jackson was the only occupant. He settled in quickly, unpacking his few possessions and preparing for the work ahead. Through the small window, he could see the main house, warm light spilling from its windows as evening approached. He wondered what Sarah was telling Jessica about him. Was he just a drifter looking for work? A friend from her past? The questions gnawed at him as he lay on the hard bunk, staring at the ceiling. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Jackson was up with the sun, eager to prove his worth. He found Sarah in the barn, already at work. "The north fence needs mending," she said without preamble. "Tools are in the shed. The cattle have been breaking through and wandering onto Harrington land." Jackson nodded. "I'll take care of it. What else needs doing?" Sarah gave him a long list of repairs and chores, clearly testing his commitment. He accepted each task without complaint, determined to show her he wasn't the same impulsive boy she'd known. As he worked through the morning, Jackson caught glimpses of Jessica playing near the house. She was a spirited child, singing to herself as she collected eggs and helped her mother with simple chores. Each time he saw her, his chest tightened with a mixture of pride and sorrow for the years he'd missed. By midday, the summer heat was stifling. Jackson had removed his shirt as he hammered fence posts back into place along the property line. He was so focused on his work that he didn't notice the small figure watching him until she spoke. "Are you going to stay here with us?" Jackson turned to find Jessica standing a few feet away, her head tilted curiously. Up close, the resemblance was unmistakable. His mother's eyes, his own stubborn chin. "If your mama allows it," he answered carefully. Jessica nodded, considering this. "We need help. Mama works too hard." "I noticed that," Jackson said, smiling gently. "That's why I'm fixing this fence." "My papa died," Jessica stated matter-of-factly, with the directness only a child could manage. "The Indians shot him." Jackson's smile faltered. "I heard. I'm very sorry. I don't remember him much," she admitted. "Mama has a picture, but it doesn't look like a real person to me." Jackson wasn't sure how to respond to that. The man Jessica called father had given her his name, his protection. For that, Jackson owed him a debt he could never repay. "Jessica." Sarah's voice called from the direction of the house. "Come back now, please." The little girl gave him one last curious look. "Mama says we're having stew for supper. You should come eat with us." Before Jackson could respond, she was running back toward the house, copper hair flying behind her. He watched her go, hammer forgotten in his hand. That evening, at Jessica's insistence, Jackson joined them for supper in the small but tidy kitchen. The conversation was stilted at first, with Sarah avoiding his eyes and responding to his questions with short answers. But Jessica filled the silence, chattering about her chickens and the new calf in the barn.
"Mr.
Jackson says he's going to stay and help us," Jessica announced as she pushed her stew around her bowl. Sarah's eyes flickered to his. "We'll see. He might find the work too hard and move on." "I'm not going anywhere," Jackson said firmly, holding her gaze. A knock at the door broke the tension. Sarah rose to answer it, returning moments later with a tall man in an expensive suit. "Mrs. Blackwood," the man said, tipping his hat. "I was riding by and thought I'd check if you'd reconsidered my offer." Sarah's face hardened. "My answer hasn't changed, Mr. Harrington. The ranch isn't for sale." Jackson stood, sensing trouble. "Evening, sir." Jackson Reid. The man Harrington gave him a dismissive glance. "You've hired help, I see. Waste of money, if you ask me. This land will be mine by autumn anyway." "Not if I have anything to say about it," Jackson replied, his voice low and dangerous. Harrington laughed. "And what would that be, Cowboy? The bank loan is due in full in 3 months. Unless Mrs. Blackwood has been hiding a fortune under her floorboards, this property will be auctioned off. I'm simply offering her a chance to leave with some dignity and money in her pocket." "We don't need your charity," Sarah said firmly. "Now if you'll excuse us, we were having supper." Harrington's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Think about your daughter, Mrs. Blackwood. My offer won't stay open forever." He nodded curtly and left, the door closing firmly behind him. Sarah sank back into her chair, her face pale. "Who was that?" Jackson asked, though he could guess the answer. "Thomas Harrington. He owns most of the land around here and wants Clearwater to complete his empire." Sarah pushed a strand of hair from her face. "He's been trying to buy us out since Daniel died." "How much do you owe the bank?" Sarah hesitated, then named a sum that made Jackson's heart sink. It was more than he had, more than most cowboys could earn in years. "We'll find a way," he promised, though he had no idea how to keep that promise. Later, after Jessica had been put to bed, Sarah joined Jackson on the porch. The night was cool, stars scattered like salt across the black velvet sky. "She looks like you," Sarah said softly. "Every day, I see more of you in her." Jackson's throat tightened. "When did you know you were expecting?" 2 weeks after you left for that cattle drive. I was going to tell you when you returned." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself. "But then my father intercepted one of your letters. He was furious. We left that night." "I came back looking for you," Jackson said. "Searched every town within 100 miles. He told me you'd be better off without the burden of a wife and child. That you were too young, that you'd resent us eventually." Sarah's voice broke. "I believed him, because it was easier than fighting. I was scared, Jackson." Jackson reached for her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. "I would have married you in a heartbeat. You know that. We were so young. Old enough to know what we wanted." He squeezed her fingers gently. "Old enough to know what we felt was real." Sarah looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "And now, after everything? Now I want a chance to be a father to my daughter. And maybe, if you'll let me, a chance to remind you why you loved me once." Sarah withdrew her hand, though not unkindly. "Let's focus on saving the ranch first. One impossible task at a time." Jackson nodded, respecting her boundaries. "Fair enough. But I'm not giving up on either." The days fell into a rhythm. Jackson worked from dawn until dusk, repairing fences, mucking stalls, rounding up stray cattle. He took stock of the ranch's assets: 20 head of cattle, 2 horses, a small vegetable garden, and a few chickens. It wasn't much, certainly not enough to pay off the bank loan. Sarah kept the books, her face growing more worried each time she reviewed their finances. They needed a miracle, or at least a significant source of income, and quickly. The answer came unexpectedly during Jackson's 3rd week at Clearwater. He'd ridden into town for supplies and overheard a conversation in the general store about a cattle buyer from Chicago looking for stock to ship east. "He's paying top dollar," one rancher was saying. "More than I've seen in years." Jackson approached the men. "This buyer, where can I find him?" "Staying at the hotel in Willow Springs," the rancher replied. "Name's Crawford. But unless you've got at least 100 head to sell, he won't be interested." Jackson thanked him and finished his shopping, an idea forming in his mind. It was risky, possibly foolish, but it might be their only chance. He rode back to Clearwater with a sense of purpose. He found Sarah hanging laundry, just as she had been the day he arrived. "I have an idea," he said without preamble. "A cattle buyer from Chicago is looking for stock. If we can increase our herd and fatten them up before autumn, we might have a chance." Sarah frowned. "And how exactly would we increase our herd?" "Cattle cost money, Jackson, which is precisely what we don't have." "Not if we find wild stock." Jackson explained his plan. The mountains to the west were home to small herds of wild cattle, descendants of domesticated animals that had escaped or been abandoned by settlers and earlier ranchers. If we can round them up, they're free for the taking. Sarah looked skeptical. "That's dangerous work. And even if we succeed, we'd need more hands to help with the drive to Willow Springs." "I can hire men I trust," Jackson assured her. "Men I've worked with on drives before." "With what money?" "They'll work for a percentage of the sale." Jackson took her hands in his. "Sarah, this could work. It's a risk, yes, but what choice do we have? She studied his face, searching for something reassurance, perhaps, or the recklessness she remembered from their youth. Instead, she found determination and a steadiness that hadn't been there before. "All right," she said finally, "but I'm coming with you." Jackson shook his head. "Someone needs to stay with Jessica. Mrs. Patterson from town can watch her. Her husband was Daniel's friend. They've helped us before." Sarah's chin lifted stubbornly. "I know these mountains better than you do, and it's my ranch, my decision." Jackson recognized the futility of arguing. This was the Sarah he remembered, fiercely independent, unwilling to be left behind. It was one of the things he'd always loved about her. "Fine," he conceded, "but you follow my lead when it comes to the cattle." Sarah smiled for the first time since his arrival, a genuine smile that lit up her eyes. "Deal." 2 days later, they set out for the mountains, leaving Jessica in the care of the kindly Mrs. Patterson. Jackson had sent telegrams to 3 cowboys he'd worked with on previous drives, asking them to meet at Clearwater in 10 days' time. It gave him and Sarah a narrow window to find and round up as many wild cattle as possible. The mountains were beautiful but treacherous, with steep ravines and dense forests. They made camp the first night in a small clearing beside a creek, the sound of rushing water mingling with the night insects' chorus. As they sat beside the campfire, Jackson found himself watching Sarah in the flickering light. She'd always been beautiful, but the years had added a depth to her beauty, a resilience, and strength that took his breath away. "You're staring," she said without looking up from the coffee she was brewing. "Hard not to," Jackson admitted. "You still take my breath away, Sarah." She busied herself with the coffee pot. "We should talk about what happens if this plan works, and if it doesn't." "If it works, we pay off the bank and you keep your ranch," Jackson said. "If it doesn't, well, I have some savings. Not enough to pay off the loan, but enough to get you and Jessica started somewhere new." Sarah poured him a cup of coffee and handed it over. "And where would you be in that scenario?" "Wherever you two are, if you'll have me." Jackson met her eyes. "I meant what I said, Sarah. I'm not leaving again." She was quiet for a long moment. "And if we save the ranch, what then?" "Then I stay on as your foreman, your partner, your whatever you need me to be, until you decide if you want more." The firelight played across her face, highlighting the indecision in her eyes. "It's not that simple, Jackson. Jessica thinks of Daniel as her father. Changing that would confuse her." "She deserves to know the truth someday," Jackson said gently. "Not right away, maybe, but eventually." Sarah nodded, acknowledging the point. "We should get some sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day." They found the first small herd of wild cattle the next afternoon, grazing in a high meadow. The animals were lean but healthy, about 15 in total. Jackson and Sarah worked together seamlessly, as if the years apart had never happened, driving the cattle down toward Clearwater. Over the next week, they located 3 more small herds, bringing their total to just over 50 head. It wasn't as many as Jackson had hoped for, but it was a start. The work was exhausting, and sometimes dangerous wild cattle could be unpredictable, and the terrain was challenging. On their final night in the mountains, a summer storm rolled in, bringing sheets of rain that threatened to scatter their hard-won herd. They worked for hours in the downpour, keeping the cattle together, soaked to the skin and mud splattered. When the storm finally passed, they found shelter in an abandoned trapper's cabin. It was small and dusty, but dry. Sarah built a fire while Jackson checked on the cattle one last time. When he returned, she had laid their wet clothes near the fire to dry and was wrapped in a blanket, her hair loose around her shoulders. The sight of her hit him like a physical blow, a memory made flesh of all the dreams that had sustained him during their years apart. "The herd settled," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "We should be able to drive them down to Clearwater tomorrow." Sarah nodded, not meeting his eyes. "There's only one blanket. We'll have to share." Jackson swallowed hard. "I can sleep on the floor. Don't be ridiculous. We're both adults." She shifted to make room for him beside the fire. "Besides, it's not as if we haven't been closer." The reminder hung between them, charged with unspoken emotion. Jackson removed his wet shirt and boots, leaving on his damp trousers as he sat beside her, accepting half of the blanket. They were silent for a long time, watching the flames dance in the small hearth. Jackson was acutely aware of her presence beside him, the scent of her hair, the warmth of her body through the blanket. "I missed you," Sarah said finally, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. "Every day. Even when I was with Daniel, even when I tried to forget, I missed you." Jackson turned to look at her, finding her eyes already on him. "I never stopped loving you, Sarah. Not for a single day." Something broke in her expression, then a wall crumbling after years of careful maintenance. She reached for him, her hand cupping his cheek. "Show me," she whispered. He hesitated, searching her face. "Are you sure?" In answer, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was tentative at first, a rediscovery, but quickly blazed into something more urgent. Years of separation, of longing, of what might have been fueled the fire between them. Jackson pulled her closer, his hands remembering the curves of her body even as he discovered new ones. Sarah sighed against his mouth, her fingers threading through his hair, holding him to her as if afraid he might disappear again. They made love slowly, reverently, the years falling away until they were once again the young lovers who had promised each other forever beneath a Missouri sky. Afterward, they lay tangled together beneath the blanket, Sarah's head on Jackson's chest, his arms wrapped securely around her. "What happens now?" she asked, tracing patterns on his skin. Jackson pressed a kiss to her hair. "Now we finish what we started. We save your ranch, we raise our daughter, and if you'll have me, we build a life together, the one we should have had all along." Sarah raised herself on one elbow to look at him. "I'm not the same girl you knew, Jackson. The years have changed me." "They've changed me too," he acknowledged. "But some things remain constant. The way I feel about you is one of them." She studied his face in the dying firelight. "I never stopped loving you either," she admitted. "I just got very good at pretending I had." Jackson drew her down for another kiss, pouring 5 years of longing into the gesture. Tomorrow they would drive the cattle back to Clearwater and face whatever challenges awaited them there. But tonight, in this small cabin high in the mountains, they reclaimed what had been lost. The return to Clearwater Ranch brought them back to reality. Jessica was overjoyed to see them, chattering excitedly about her time with Mrs. Patterson. Sarah fell easily back into the role of mother, though Jackson caught her watching him with new awareness when she thought he wasn't looking. The cowboys Jackson had telegraphed arrived on schedule 3 weathered men named Hank, Lewis, and Orville. They were seasoned cattle handlers who had worked with Jackson on drives from Texas to Kansas. They took one look at the wild stock and set to work, helping to integrate them with Sarah's existing herd. "Might be enough to save the ranch if Crawford's paying what they say he is," Hank commented as they worked. "But it'll be close." Jackson knew he was right. Even with the additional cattle, they would barely clear the bank loan. And there was another problem. Thomas Harrington had gotten wind of their plan and was making trouble. The wealthy rancher began by posting men along his property line, preventing the Clearwater herd from accessing the best grazing land. Then he spread rumors in town that Jackson was Sarah's lover, damaging her reputation among the more conservative townsfolk. "He's trying to force you to sell," Jackson said one evening as they discussed the situation. "Make life difficult enough that you give up." Sarah's jaw set in a stubborn line. "It won't work. My father was a harder man than Thomas Harrington could ever hope to be. I survived him. I can survive this." Jackson admired her determination, even as he worried about the toll the stress was taking on her. Dark circles had formed under her eyes, and she'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. The final blow came a week before they planned to drive the cattle to Willow Springs. Jackson rode into town for supplies and returned with grave news. "Crawford's buyer has moved on," he told Sarah, his face grim. "Harrington told him our cattle were diseased, and he's gone to purchase from ranches further north." Sarah sat heavily in a kitchen chair. "So that's it. We've lost." "No," Jackson said firmly. "We'll drive the cattle to Cheyenne. The railroad's buying there." "Cheyenne? That's 2 weeks' drive, at least. We can do it. The men are willing. We'd need to leave immediately, but it's possible." Sarah looked out the window toward the corral where Jessica was playing with a kitten she'd adopted. "What about Jessica? I can't leave her for that long, and she can't make that journey." "Mrs. Patterson would watch her again," Jackson suggested. Sarah shook her head.
No.
"She's done enough already. And I don't want to be away from Jessica for so long." She turned back to Jackson, decision written in her eyes. "You'll have to go without me." Jackson wanted to argue, but knew she was right. Jessica needed her mother, and the cattle drive would be no place for a child. "I'll bring back enough to save the ranch," he promised. "You have my word." That night, after Jessica was asleep, Sarah came to Jackson in the bunkhouse. They had been careful to keep their rekindled relationship hidden, mindful of Jessica's impressionable age and the town's prying eyes. "Promise me you'll come back," Sarah said as they lay together in the narrow bunk. "No matter what happens with the cattle, with the money, promise me you'll return to us." Jackson held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away. You and Jessica are my family, Sarah. My home. I'll always come back to you." They made love with a desperate intensity, both aware of the time stretching before them and the uncertainties that lay ahead. In the morning, Jackson would leave with the herd, facing a difficult journey and an uncertain market. Sarah would remain behind, defending their land against Harrington's machinations while waiting for Jackson's return. Dawn broke clear and cool, promising a good day for starting the drive. Jackson and the 3 cowboys had the herd ready to move by sunrise. Sarah and Jessica stood on the porch to see them off. "When will you be back, Mr. Jackson?" Jessica asked, her blue eyes his eyes serious in her small face. Jackson knelt to her level. "As soon as I can, little lady. You take care of your mama while I'm gone, all right?" Jessica nodded solemnly. "I will. And I'll take care of your horse, too." Jackson had given her the task of feeding his spare mount, a gentle mare he'd left behind. "I'm counting on it," he said, ruffling her copper hair. He straightened and turned to Sarah, wishing he could kiss her properly, but settling for a brief touch of her hand. "I'll send word when we reach Cheyenne." Sarah's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Be safe." With a final nod, Jackson mounted his horse and rode to the head of the herd. The drive had begun. The first week went smoothly. The cattle moved well, and the weather held clear. Jackson set a steady pace, pushing the herd but not exhausting them. They needed to reach Cheyenne with the animals in good condition to fetch the best price. Trouble came on the 8th day, in the form of a band of rustlers who tried to cut off part of the herd during a river crossing. Jackson and his men fought them off, but not without cost. Lewis took a bullet in the shoulder, and they lost 5 head of cattle. "Could have been worse," Hank commented as they made camp that night, tending to Lewis's wound. "Rustlers usually hit harder than that." Jackson nodded grimly. "We'll double the watch tonight. I don't want any more surprises." They reached Cheyenne on schedule, driving the weary cattle into the holding pens near the railroad. Jackson's heart sank when he saw how many other herds were already there, glutting the market and driving prices down. "We're too late," Orville said, voicing what they were all thinking. Railroads only buying prime stock now, and at half what they were paying last month. Jackson refused to accept defeat. He left the men with the cattle and went into town, determined to find a buyer who would pay a fair price. He spent 2 days negotiating, using every skill and connection he had, before finally striking a deal with a meat packer who needed stock for government contracts. The price was lower than he'd hoped, but higher than the railroad was offering. It would be enough to pay the bank loan with a small margin left over if he paid the Cowboys less than promised and took nothing for himself. "You can't do that," Hank protested when Jackson explained the situation. "You worked harder than any of us." "I have my reasons," Jackson replied, thinking of Sarah and Jessica waiting at Clearwater. "The money goes to save the ranch. That's what matters." After settling accounts and paying his men, Jackson sent a telegram to Sarah with the news, then began the long ride back to Thunder Creek. He pushed himself hard, sleeping little and changing horses at relay stations along the way. The need to return to Sarah and Jessica drove him onward, even when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him. He was a day's ride from Clearwater when he encountered a rider heading in the opposite direction. The man recognized him and reined in his horse.
Reid?
"That you?" Jackson pulled up, recognizing one of the townsmen from Thunder Creek. "Simmons. What brings you out this way?" The man's face was grave. "Headed to fetch the doctor. There's been trouble at Clearwater." Jackson's blood ran cold. "What kind of trouble?" "Fire. Started in the barn 2 nights ago. Mrs. Blackwood got her daughter out safe, but she went back in for something and got trapped when the roof collapsed." Jackson didn't wait to hear more. He spurred his horse to a gallop, pushing the animal to its limits as fear clawed at his throat. Sarah, Jessica. The thought of losing either of them, of losing both, was unbearable. He reached Clearwater as the sun was setting, the golden light illuminating the charred remains of the barn and part of the house. The main structure was still standing, though smoke damage was visible on the outer walls. Jackson dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, running toward the house. "Sarah? Jessica?" The door opened, and Mrs. Patterson appeared, her face drawn with worry. "Mr. Reid, thank the Lord you're back." "Where are they?" he demanded, his voice raw. "Jessica's inside, sleeping. She's had a terrible fright, but isn't hurt." The older woman hesitated. "Mrs. Blackwood is in the bedroom." She's badly burned, Mr. Reid. I've done what I can, but she needs a doctor." Jackson pushed past her into the house, his heart hammering against his ribs. He found Sarah lying on her bed, her breathing shallow, bandages covering her arms and one side of her face. "Sarah," he whispered, dropping to his knees beside the bed. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on him with difficulty. "Jackson? You came back." "Of course I came back. I promised, remember?" He took her unbandaged hand gently in his. "What happened?" "Harrington's men," she whispered. "They set the fire. Jessica's drawings were in the barn. She made them for you. I couldn't let them burn." Rage surged through Jackson, temporarily displacing his fear. "Harrington will pay for this." "The money," Sarah said, her voice strengthening slightly. "Did you get enough?" "Yes," Jackson assured her. "More than enough. The ranch is safe." Relief crossed her face.
"Good.
That's good." Jackson leaned closer, pressing his lips to her forehead. "Now you need to rest. I'm going to fetch the doctor." "No." She gripped his hand with surprising strength. "Stay with me." Simmons already went for the doctor. Jackson hesitated, torn between the need to stay with her and the urge to find Harrington and make him pay. "All right," he said finally. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." He stayed by her side through the night, bathing her fevered brow and talking softly about the future they would build together once she recovered. Dawn was breaking when the doctor finally arrived, his face grim as he examined Sarah's burns. "She's young and strong," he told Jackson afterward. "That's in her favor. But the burns are severe, especially on her arms and side. There will be scarring, and recovery will be long and painful. But she will recover?" Jackson pressed. The doctor hesitated. If infection doesn't set in, yes. The next few days will tell. Jackson thanked him and paid his fee, then returned to Sarah's side. Jessica had awakened and now stood in the doorway, her small face pale and frightened. "Is Mama going to die?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jackson went to her, kneeling to look her in the eye.
No, sweetheart.
"Your mama is very strong, and she's fighting hard to get better." Jessica studied him solemnly. "You love her, don't you? Like in the stories." "Yes," Jackson admitted. "I've loved your mama for a very long time." "Then you should marry her," Jessica declared with a child's simple logic. "When she gets better." Jackson smiled despite the gravity of the situation. "I'd like that very much. But that's for your mama to decide." Jessica nodded, accepting this. "I'm going to draw her a picture to make her feel better." As she scampered off to find her pencils, Jackson returned to Sarah's bedside. She was sleeping fitfully, her forehead creased with pain, even in slumber. He took her hand gently, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I'm not losing you again," he whispered. "Do you hear me, Sarah? We've come too far. Fight this. Come back to us." The days that followed were some of the longest of Jackson's life. Sarah's fever spiked dangerously, then broke, only to return again. The doctor came daily, changing bandages and administering laudanum for the pain. Jackson barely left her side, sleeping in a chair beside her bed and taking his meals there. Jessica proved remarkably resilient, helping where she could and keeping herself occupied with drawing pictures for her mother's recovery. A week after the fire, Sheriff Mills rode out to Clearwater. He found Jackson chopping wood behind the house, working out his frustration and fear in physical labor. "Harrington's men are in my jail," the sheriff said without preamble. "They confessed to setting the fire. Said Harrington paid them to scare Mrs. Blackwood into selling, not to hurt anyone." Jackson drove the axe into the chopping block with enough force to split it. "And Harrington?" "Denies everything, of course. But with his men's testimony, he'll face charges." "Not good enough," Jackson growled. "Sarah could die because of him." The sheriff eyed him warily. "Don't do anything foolish, Reid. Mrs. Blackwood and her daughter need you here, not hanging from a gallows for murder." Jackson took a deep breath, knowing the sheriff was right. "Justice, then. I want justice." "You'll have it," Sheriff Mills promised. "The judge arrives next week. In the meantime, I came to give you this." He handed over an envelope. "It's the bank loan, marked paid in full." "I stopped by the bank on my way here." Jackson accepted the envelope, a small weight lifting from his shoulders. At least Sarah would keep her ranch, whatever happened. "Thank you," he said. "For everything." The sheriff nodded. "She's a good woman. This town owes her better than what happened." After the sheriff left, Jackson returned to Sarah's bedside. Her fever had broken again, and this time her sleep seemed more peaceful. He sat beside her, holding the bank note in his hands. "We did it, Sarah," he said softly. "The ranch is yours, free and clear. Now you just need to get better, so we can enjoy it." To his surprise, Sarah's eyes fluttered open. "Jackson." Her voice was weak, but clearer than it had been in days. "I'm here," he said, taking her hand. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by cattle," she managed a small smile. "But alive." Relief washed over him. "The doctor said your fever breaking was a good sign. You're going to be all right, Sarah." She turned her head slightly to look at him better. "You stayed." "I told you I would." Jackson squeezed her hand gently. "Nothing could have dragged me away." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Jessica?" "She's fine. Not a scratch on her. She's been drawing pictures for you, enough to paper the entire house." A tear slipped down Sarah's cheek. "I was so afraid I'd never see her again. Never see you again." Jackson leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers. You're stuck with both of us now. I paid off the bank loan. Clearwater is safe. Sarah closed her eyes, more tears escaping. Thank you. Rest now, Jackson whispered. We'll talk more when you're stronger. Sarah's recovery was slow but steady. As the weeks passed, she graduated from bed to chair, then to short walks around the house. The burns healed, leaving scars on her arms and side, and a smaller one along her jawline. The doctor assured her that with time, even these would fade. Jackson took over running the ranch, hiring 2 local boys to help with the daily chores. He moved out of the bunkhouse and into the spare room of the main house, mindful of propriety and Jessica's presence. Thomas Harrington was convicted of arson and attempted murder. The judge sentenced him to 10 years in the territorial prison, and his property was sold at auction to pay restitution to Sarah and cover his legal costs. By autumn, Sarah was strong enough to sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the plains in gold and crimson. Jackson joined her one such evening, bringing her a shawl against the growing chill. "Jessica's asleep," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "She made me read that story about the princess and the dragon 3 times before she would close her eyes." Sarah smiled. "She has you wrapped around her little finger." "Guilty as charged," Jackson admitted with a grin. "She's hard to resist." "Like her father," Sarah said softly, looking at him with an expression that made his heart skip. They sat in companionable silence for a time, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Jackson had been waiting for the right moment, and something told him it had arrived. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small wooden box and handed it to her. Sarah opened it to find a simple gold ring set with a small diamond. Her eyes widened as she looked from the ring to Jackson. "It was my mother's," he explained. "The only thing of hers I kept after she died. I've been carrying it since I was 17, waiting for the right woman to give it to." He took her hand in his. "I found her when I was 17 too, but it took me a while to find her again." Sarah's eyes glistened with tears. "Jackson, I love you, Sarah. I always have. These past months, watching you fight to recover, seeing your strength and courage, I've fallen even more in love with you, if that's possible." He took a deep breath. "I want to be a proper father to Jessica. I want to build a life with you here at Clearwater. I want to wake up beside you every morning and go to sleep with you in my arms every night." Sarah touched the ring gently. "Are you asking me to marry you, Jackson Reid?" "I am," he confirmed, his voice husky with emotion. "Will you?" Instead of answering, Sarah leaned forward and kissed him, pouring 5 years of separation and months of healing into the gesture. When she finally pulled back, they were both breathless. "Is that a yes?" Jackson asked, his heart pounding. Sarah laughed, the sound like music to his ears. "Yes, Jackson. It's a yes." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Thunder Creek. Jessica served as flower girl, beaming with excitement at the prospect of having Jackson officially become her father. After the ceremony, they told her the truth that Jackson was her real father, that he had loved her mother since before she was born, and that they had found each other again against all odds. Jessica took the news with the adaptability of childhood. "I knew you were special," she told Jackson seriously. "You have the same eyes as me." Life at Clearwater Ranch settled into a new rhythm. With the bank loan paid and Harrington's restitution money, they were able to make improvements to the property, expanding the house, building a new barn, increasing their herd with quality stock. Jackson proved to be as good at ranching as he had been at driving cattle. Under his management, Clearwater flourished, becoming one of the most prosperous operations in the territory. Sarah recovered fully, though she carried the scars of that night as reminders of how close they had come to losing everything. A year after their wedding, Sarah gave birth to a son they named James, after Jackson's father. Jessica took to being a big sister with enthusiasm, helping her mother and doting on her baby brother. On warm summer evenings, The family would often sit on the porch, watching the sunset just as Sarah and Jackson had done the night he proposed. On one such evening, with James asleep in his cradle and Jessica playing with her kitten, now a full-grown cat, Sarah leaned her head against her husband's shoulder. "Are you happy?" she asked softly. Jackson looked at their land stretching toward the horizon, at their children, at the woman who had been his first and only love. "More than I ever thought possible," he answered truthfully. "You were my first love, Sarah. Lost to time and circumstance. But fate gave us another chance, and I intend to make the most of every day we have together." Sarah smiled up at him, the love in her eyes mirroring his own. "Your last love won again," she whispered. "Forever this time," Jackson promised, sealing the vow with a kiss as the last rays of sunlight gilded the land they had fought so hard to keep. In the years that followed, Clearwater Ranch prospered beyond their wildest dreams. Jackson and Sarah worked side by side, partners in every sense, their love deepening with each passing season. Jessica grew into a beautiful young woman with her father's determination and her mother's spirit. James was joined by twin sisters, Emma and Elizabeth, completing their family. The territory changed around them, becoming part of the state of Wyoming. The frontier gave way to settlements, railroads connected the once isolated communities, and the Wild West began its transformation into memory. Through it all, the Reid family remained, their love story becoming part of local legend, the tale of a cowboy and his first love, lost and found again against impossible odds. And on quiet nights, when the children were asleep and the house was still, Jackson would hold Sarah close and thank whatever twist of fate had led him back to her, giving them the chance to reclaim what time had stolen and build the life they were always meant to share.